Hello, BookTube. This is Aaron from Aaron Read a Book or Aaron Read a Book. Going to do a bit of a August wrap up. Um, it's been a good month. I haven't read as many books this month as I did the last couple of months, but I've read some quite chunky books. So I've talked about most of these before, so I won't go into too much depth with them. But I know some people prefer watching wrap ups than the weekly ones. Yeah, so this month was GarbAugust as well. I only managed two GarbAugust ones, um, which is a shame. I wish I'd read some more, but I just got stuck into some really big non-fictions and I didn't have enough time to read the garbage. Um, I'm going to go backwards because I haven't spoken about this book first. So I just finished a book called Gridlinked by Neal Asher. I've never read Neal Asher before, but I've recently seen Bookends and Biscuits and Science Fiction Reads both talk about him, like their sort of love for this author, and I'd never read him before, and he's from Essex as well, like me, so it, I need to check out the local author. So Gridlinked is the first in his Agent Cormac books, and his series are all set in the same universe called the Polity universe, which is a future. It's our universe, but far in the future, and the world is run by sort of kindly AIs. So unlike a lot of sci-fi where the AIs are evil, the AIs here run the world and um, uh, release humanity to focus on other things. And that concept must be influenced by Ian M. Banks's Culture series, which I'm a big fan of. So I was very happy to see sort of Ian M. Banks's influence on this, and I quite like that concept of AI being used to help humanity rather than sort of terminate a situation. Um, Agent Cormac himself is obviously as well based on James Bond. I think it even references James Bond in one of the there's little info dumps at the beginning of every chapter, which are sort of um, excerpts from history books written in the future and stuff like that. And they like some of the books don't believe that Agent Cormac even existed and stuff like that, but they even compare him to James Bond in that. Um, and there's one very James Bond moment where he sort of sleeps with this woman he's working with, and then totally ignores her after, and she gets really pissed off, which is un Bond like, I suppose. Um, but basically, Agent Cormac's been what they call grid linked for over 30 years, and that is basically connected to the internet through a brain augmentation that is behind your ear. So a lot of people in this are highly augmented. There's golems which are like androids, really super powerful androids, and there's people who have made themselves look like cats and things like that. But this concept of being grid linked is quite interesting because must have been the very early days of the internet when this was written in 2001. Well, not very early, but still. I think I had maybe a home PC with 50k, 56k modem or something in 2001. So it's quite interesting that he's seen this sort of information being plugged directly into your brain. Um, but he's been gridlinked for too long, so he works for basically MI5, but they're called the Earth Central Agency or something. Uh, and he's so important to them as an agent that they've left him gridlinked for too long, and he's sort of losing his humanity because instead of talking to people, you just access all this information about them and stuff like that. And this is quite an interesting concept now that we all have mobile phones and we're all sort of grid linked in a way, although not directly to our brain, but like you see people walking around with their heads in their phones all the time. So I like. I think this is quite an interesting concept that he wrote about in 2001. So they're weaning Agent Cormac off the grid, but he has a mission. So he has there's these things called runcibles, which are a word from Edward Lear's poem, um, that sort of are portals from one world to another, and they go in what they call underspace, which is how they explain this sort of new dimension that so people can travel faster than the speed of light. Um, this runcible's exploded, and killed a bunch of people on the planet, and he has to investigate why that is. And his previous case is also coming back to haunt him because there's this he kills this separatist terrorist, uh, whose brother wants revenge. So you sort of follow Cormac and you follow the terrorist and his henchman, a mercenary called John Stanton, as they try and hunt Cormac, and Cormac as he tries to investigate why this runcible exploded. Um, yeah, I love this book. It was over 500 pages, but I flew through it in a few days because it was just it's like a sci-fi thriller space opera. So it was right up my street. So I really loved that. Definitely going to read more of those later in the year. Um, and I feel like it's always exciting when you find like a new sci-fi universe to explore. So this is just the first in a big bunch of books. So it's very very fun. Um, Previous to that, I read Open Water by Caleb Azumah Nelson. Um, I spoke about this quite a lot in my last video. It's very short. It sort of not plot heavy story of a young black man in London, a photographer, sort of meeting a girl that becomes his best friend and that he falls in love with. Very spoken word style to it, very lyrical writing, lots of references to black art and music and books. Bit Zadie Smith. What one thing I didn't mention that I really liked about it is how good it is because I live where this is set. I live in sort of southeast London. It's very typical of my life. Well, obviously not the parts about being black and being harassed by police and stuff, being always being scared. I can't relate to that in any way, but I do relate to the like going out to gigs and going into chicken shops after, which sounds silly, but it's interesting when you read in a book sort of your things that you're used to. It's quite nice. Um, yeah, I enjoyed it. I don't think it's not my usual style of book, obviously, but it was fun to sort of branch out and try it. And I do want to read something he writes later on, maybe not from the second person's perspective, which I found difficult. I find all stream of consciousness difficult, even older works. So, but I would, I, and also I think this is very biographical. So I always want to, if I find a book that's very biographical, it's I want to read another book by the author and see how they tackle something that isn't basically their own life. But yeah, I do recommend it. It's good, and the writing was really good. Um, Before that, I read Mary Queen of Scots, which I spoke about a lot. My first taste of Lady Antonia Fraser's biographies. Really good biography. It sort of bridges that sort of gap between pop history, and academic history quite well. In that you can tell she's well versed in all the primary sources, and she can argue um, against other historians, but also very entertaining writing and a super entertaining life of Mary Queen of Scots. Although she made some silly decisions sometimes, but yeah, it's very interesting, and that it also made me want to read a biography Elizabeth I, which I've never read. I've got Alison Weir's one hanging around somewhere, but Elizabeth I seems very sort of Henry VIII in this. So yeah, um, definitely read some more Lady Antonia Fraser as well. Before that, I read a book for the Women's World Cup Historathon. No, that one was Historathon. This is for the Women's World Cup read along. Again, an author I'd never read and never even heard of, which is the joy of the Women's World Cup Readathon. You get introduced to new countries and new authors. Yeah, I love this book. So this is a again very biographical book about growing up in a Moroccan harem in the 1940s, and it's like a deeply feminist book. Like Fatema Mernissi is basically heralded as one of the main Islamic feminists, and all the characters in this. She's a little girl in it, but her mother and her grandmother are two very different types of feminists, and they want sort of a freer life for her. But just the general day to day stuff in the harem was very interesting. In this, just it sort of goes. Each chapter's about a different thing. Like there's a chapter about cinema, going to cinema, and there's like chapters about their skincare routines and stuff like that. And it's all got these amazing characters in it, and it's just a completely new world to me. Like obviously have very little in common with this author's upbringing, but it was super interesting, and I definitely recommend this. She's also nice on the page, great writing. Before that, we had Slugs by Shaun Hudson. So this was a GarbAugust read that was one that Criminoli specifically recommended. I said in my review before, I think this is the book that I've made the most noises out loud reading, be it laughter or sort of gasps of horror. It did actually scare me a little bit as well, because it's things coming out of your taps, and that's quite a scary concept. But I would just use salt, which no one in this novel thought to do. But it's got all the hallmarks of a great GarbAugust book. It's ridiculous, disgusting, a little bit terrifying, and really sort of juvenile sex scenes that are really funny. And there's this sort of silly things where this person's doing gardening and one of the slugs gets in their glove and and starts eating their hands, and their sort of solution to this problem is to cut their hands off with garden shears, and there's like blood arcing everywhere. Highly recommend Slugs. I loved it. It's definitely the most fun bit of garbage I've ever read. Before that, it was Exit Strategy by Martha Wells. So this was book 4 in the Murderbot series. I was getting a bit annoyed by Murderbot being a bit repetitive in the plot lines, but this book definitely was different, although it does use a lot of the same cast as from the first book. But I could feel this one. This is the last novella before there's a big novel, and the big novel won the Hugo and the Nebula. So that's why I've been reading this series, because I want to read every Hugo and Nebula winner. So I'm looking forward to that. And I feel like it needs a novel now. The novellas are fun, but the novel I'm hoping goes a bit more in depth. And throughout it, Murderbot's becoming more and more aware of his own humanity. But it's these are fun little books. They're really funny, and they're sort of extreme action and violence. So fun little sci-fi books. And then the first book I read in August was this little pocket novel, and this obviously was for GarbAugust, and this was just a very small thing that comes free with a women's magazine. Oh, I don't know if it is free actually because there's a price there, but this is like the longest running women's magazine in England apparently, and you get little pocket novels with it. Better than I thought it was going to be, considering the look of it. Sort of Outlander vibes, but not any graphic sex in it. I think obviously the audience is quite old ladies maybe. I mean the writing's very big. But yeah, it was fun. It was a nice way to be introduced into GarbAugust anyway. So I also was reading. I've got halfway through Empire of Pain, but I think I'm gonna have a break with this because this month I watched Dopesick and I watched half of Painkiller, and I've read half of this. So I'm sort of sick to death of the Sacklers. They're obviously a super evil evil family. This I like Patrick Radden-Keefe. I like the writing. But I already seem to know a lot about this family now because I've watched sort of 2 TV series about them. So I'm going to have a little break when this one, and I'll finish the second half later in the year. Maybe when my brain has fogged some of the information, so I'm not just reading stuff I've watched on TV. And plus, I've got a lot of reading to do for September. So I mentioned in my last video I've got a new job, so I'm starting my new job next week, and I kind of want to read all the Shake Tube or Shake Timber books, plays, but I also want to sort of nail out loads of for Shorty September as well. So I feel like I'm starting to feel the booktuber pressure of events, but I sort of felt that when I was just a commentator as well. But yeah, I've hopefully gonna sort of churn through loads of books in September, and Shakespeare plays are you can read them in an afternoon, so mostly. So hopefully I'll churn through a lot in September. Let me know if you've read any of these books, BookTube, especially if you're a fan of Neal Asher, because I feel like I feel excited that I found a new author I like, a new sci-fi author, and he's British and from Essex. Yeah, have a good one, BookTube. Bye bye.